Thank you all for joining us today for our program, Changes in the Practice of the Law Post-COVID. I'm Ashira Ostrow, and I'm a professor at the Maurice A. Dean School of Law at Hofstra University. And I teach a variety of courses in property, land use, real estate transactions, and some local government law. I am also the executive director of the Breslin Center for Real Estate Studies. And so when we think about, or when I was thinking about kind of the impact of COVID on how we're going to practice law, I think about it in kind of three stages. And so the first stage was just that immediate response, that overnight transition to working from home, and kind of what were the complications of that, what were the challenges, and now kind of having lived through it for a bit, what are the benefits? What are some things that actually we appreciate about it? And then the second stage is, I think, what we're approaching right now, which is this kind of midterm response before a vaccine is developed. So for the next 6 months, a year, 2 years, however long it takes for there to be an effective vaccine, right? What are our plans? How are we going to reopen our offices? What kind of changes are we going to need to make to help employees feel comfortable coming back to work, to help all of us feel comfortable? And then the last stage would be kind of the long term. So once we do have a vaccine, once a vaccine is developed, what changes are going to be permanent, right? What's going to stick? And what will return back to the pre-COVID status? And so that's something just kind of really interesting to think about. And we're very fortunate to have with us a panel of individuals who all manage large offices and are really in the trenches dealing with these issues on a daily basis. And so I really want to thank all of our panelists for joining us. I know how busy you are, and we really appreciate you taking the time. Just a note on the format of the program. We will have some time for Q&A at the end of the program, and so we encourage you to submit questions through the chat function throughout, and then hopefully we'll be able to get through as many as we can when we get to the Q&A section. And so it is now my pleasure to introduce our first panelist, Wes Rudas. Wes is an executive director in Cushman & Wakefield's Manhattan office, and he has over 25 years of commercial real estate experience. He's represented both tenants and landlords and completed transactions all over the country with tenants from a wide range of industries, including financial firms, technology firms, legal firms, nonprofit, etc. And he is also has served as the building leasing agent for over 6 million square feet of office space. Wes was the top producing broker in New York and one of the top national brokers in 2013 and 14. And most importantly, Wes is a proud alumni of Hofstra Law School, and we're delighted to have him back and to welcome him as our first panelist.
Hi, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Wes Rudas. As Ashira mentioned, I'm an executive director in Cushman & Wakefield's Midtown office. I've represented commercial tenants and landlords in New York and globally for about 26 years. Working from home, working from home has been challenging. I'm somebody that likes the energy of coming into the workplace. And while I think that the world is going to change and work from home is something that's here to stay, I've been through a lot of these, Sandy and 9/11, and I strongly believe that eventually things are going to normalize and the majority of the workforce are going to return to the office. Our firm, which is Cushman & Wakefield, we plan to start returning to our office in Manhattan in mid-June. We're going to return with about 25% of our staff, and then we're going to go from there. Cushman has really been at the forefront of helping tenants in Asia and now all over the world in terms of recovery readiness. We early on formed the Recovery Readiness Task Force to lead the development of best practices, products, partnerships, so that we can best prepare our clients for a post-COVID-19 recovery and the eventual return to the workplace. To date, Cushman has helped move our own employees and those of our clients into more than 800 million square feet of space globally, and over 1 million workers in China into over 1,000 buildings. We recently released a how-to guide for reopening your workplace. This outlines some of the best practices and has step-by-step protocols for tenants and landlords, so they can use it as they begin the transition back to the workplace. A key element of the guide, which I'll go through now, is our Safe 6 workplace readiness essentials. The Safe 6 are: prepare the building, prepare the workforce, control access, create a social distancing plan, reduce touch points and increase cleaning, and communicate for confidence. First, prepare the building. Main focus with preparing the building is really worker safety. Building preparedness and maintenance should be happening right now while the buildings aren't really heavily in use. Collaboration is key between the various stakeholders: the landlord, tenant, building manager, security company, etc. And responsibilities really need to be owned by the different parties, especially the landlords and the tenants. Communication protocols need to be identified. Everything needs to be communicated to the tenants. And a lot of this depends on the type of space, whether it's a flex building or an office building. Stations need to be established for distribution of PPE, for hand washing, for hand sanitizer. And the key here is communication protocols really need to be identified and communicated to all the parties. Second is preparing the workforce. This should be done in phases. It's important to decide who returns to the office and when. Currently, we're experiencing a trial by fire. It's helping us all determine what roles can be most productive working remotely. A few examples of the pros and cons of who should return to work versus staying home. You know, some of the pros: access to people and the team leaders, access to the specific equipment like the copiers, computers, etc. Access to amenities in the workplace like your conference center. Excuse me. You know, next is prepare the building. Excuse me. Next is the cons. Personal health, high-risk individuals, lack of childcare. Success really depends on adherence to the new protocols. We need to consider educating and training employees virtually before returning, and this is something that needs to be reinforced after arrival. Next is control access. This varies depending on the space and the use. You need to focus on the high traffic areas: entry and exit points, lobbies, elevators, common areas, shipping rooms. A few examples of things to think about: if possible, reduce the number of entrances, establish social distancing guidelines. Perhaps you can mark off 6 feet in certain areas, like at the reception desk. You want to stagger the arrival and departure times. I mean, you don't want 100 people waiting to get upstairs at the elevator at 9 a.m. Carefully plan stations for things like hand sanitizer with clear, simple signage so people know where to go. Use new technologies where applicable: touchless registration, low touch elevator controls. And you need to reconfigure furniture layouts to promote congregating, like in your reception area where you might have a bunch of couches. You want to reconfigure that so people aren't staying there. Social distancing. This is something we've been working on for 2 months, so we're starting to figure it out. But before we even get to the workplace, you need to consider modes of transportation, traffic patterns, parking. All this varies greatly on location. New York City is very different from Long Island and Nassau County. The workplace is going to have to get reconfigured to promote social distancing. Things like designating foot traffic patterns, managing schedules, temporarily closing small spaces. These are things that all should be considered. You can achieve this in a variety of ways. First, you can remove chairs from every other workstation, rope off common areas, post signage to direct traffic flow, keep conference room doors open, and where possible, you can designate doors as entrance and exit, and you can clearly mark where people should sit to maintain 6 feet. In some cases, companies have gone further and they've redesigned space with things like installing carpet tile, which shows in different colors specifically what 6 feet is. Or some firms are installing plexiglass shields between the cubicles. You know, Cushman we've designed a concept called the 6-foot office. It's discussed in our handbook and our website and elsewhere. It shows what a lot of these concepts and redesigns look like when they're implemented. Big concern, frankly, is restrooms. A lot of this depends on the density and the configuration, but a few simple things that can be considered now. You can put hand sanitizer dispensers both immediately inside and immediately outside of the bathroom, of the restroom, and this way it alleviates the concern of opening the door right after you wash your hands. Also, you can install signage which encourages hand washing and reminds people not to touch their face. Next, manage touch points and increase cleaning. Big issue here is supply chain. Where are you going to get your hand sanitizer? And this is going to be an issue for some time. So you really need to plan ahead. Management and education are important to enforce the new cleaning protocols. Where possible, employ new technology like low touch screens and fixtures. Also have disinfectant wipes available near things that must be touched, like your copy room. And consider replacing open food or beverages with single serving items. I know a lot of firms are actually closing their food distribution in the office entirely. Lastly, very important, communicate for confidence. The importance of simple, transparent communication among all the parties is essential. You really need to establish the clear leadership responsibilities before returning, and be empathetic and understanding of people's concerns and fears. I mean, this is the first time we're all going through this, so people are going to be concerned and they're going to have fear. So you need to be understanding, and also be sure to set very clear expectations for your people and the rules that they need to follow. This is just a brief overview. A lot of more information is available in our 35-page guide, and also on the Cushman website. We keep updating and improving our information as we help more and more people. And, we're tailoring to the needs of specific industries. So this is a lot of what we're doing, is helping our clients with this process.
Thank you so much, Wes, for that really informative and kind of industry standard. I think now everybody's using Cushman & Wakefield's guidelines. So thank you for sharing that with us. It's my pleasure to introduce our second speaker for today, Amy Letter. And Amy is also an alum of Hofstra Law School, and we're delighted to welcome her back. Amy is the executive partner of Holland & Knight's New York office, and she's co-leader of the firm's corporate M&A and securities practice group in the New York and Stamford region. And in her practice, she advises clients on general corporate matters, including mergers and acquisitions, securities offerings, strategic alliances, and capital raising transactions. And so again, Amy, welcome, and we are really looking forward to your thoughts.
Thanks, Ashira, and thanks to Hofstra Law for including me on this panel. So as Ashira said, my name is Amy Leader. I am a proud 1992 graduate of Hofstra Law School, where I actually met my husband in law school, and we have 2 children, one of whom is now studying for her LSATs. So I have an interesting perspective of both being a lawyer and watching my daughter's friends sort of in where some of you are in terms of going to law school and what the future brings for the recent graduates. I spent the majority of my career at a firm called McDermott, Will & Emery, and I joined Holland & Knight about 5 years ago. And as Ashira said, I have 2 administrative roles in addition to practicing law, which is I am head of our Northeast corporate practice group and the executive partner of our New York office. And at our firm, our New York office is the 3rd largest office of 28 offices. So we have about 170 attorneys and about 300 people. So in that capacity, COVID has been really interesting in terms of both, having everybody, pretty quickly move to remote working, and now trying to figure out how we're going to get back. I think transitioning from work to home was easier than I think we thought, and I think most people thought. We actually were planning a test of it, and then the test became the real thing, so we never had a test. And I think it went pretty seamlessly. I think for us, the challenge was most of our lawyers worked remotely from time to time, whether they were traveling or work from home, so they were pretty used to it. We definitely had some of our senior lawyers who were not as tech savvy, so we had to, get them equipped and trained to be able to do it. And similarly, for many of our support staff who never really worked remotely, we equipped all of them with laptops and training so that they could help support us in a way that was really unusual. But I think it worked way better than we thought. We didn't really have any glitches. We were very concerned about the IT capability, and if everybody sort of, either if they weren't working remotely, if they were basically checking into Citrix, whether the system would crash. We're 1,400 lawyers firm-wide, and we were worried about that. Because several of our offices are in hurricane zones, we had pretty good systems in place when a couple of offices would be closed at once, but never everybody at once. And remarkably, we didn't really have any glitches, and that was great. I think, now we're back into trying to return to work, and we have a firm-wide committee in addition to office committees trying to figure out and get feedback from our populations as to, what people want, what are people concerned, how we're going to do it. I agree with Wes. I mean, eventually we're all going to be back. And I definitely think that though there are some really positive things that have come out of working remote in different ways. For example, Zoom. I don't think we at our firm had Zoom capabilities for 2.5 years, and we used it for conference calls. I don't think anyone ever used it for video. And now every single one of our calls, even if we were in the office with different offices, are now all on Zoom and video. And I think that is here to stay. I think most law firms are taking it slow. I mean, we're pretty lucky that we're able to do our work productively from home. And I think particularly in my office, which is Midtown New York City, we have to deal with things such as mass transit. Vast majority of our population takes some kind of mass transit. We have childcare issues for our staff, and until that's sorted out, people are really challenged, I think, for that. We have elevators and all the things Wes was talking about, we're talking about in our firm and our building as to keeping people safe and sanitized. And then, there's the population that are at risk at COVID, whether if they have underlying health conditions or if they're of a certain age, and we're really grappling with how to handle that. And I think overall right now, because we have not opened up in any of our offices, even in our offices where states have opened up like Florida and Georgia and Texas, none of our offices are open yet. So I think we're waiting and seeing.
Oh, Amy, thank you so much for all of that and all of your views on that. And I'm sure we have questions for you in the Q&A section. And now I'm happy to turn the panel over to our third panelist, Keith Reich.
Reich, it's okay.
Keith is a shareholder at Greenberg Traurig, and he has been practicing law for more than 30 years. His practice focuses on real estate law, and he has wide-ranging experience with commercial leasing, lease and loan restructuring, sales and acquisitions of commercial, industrial, and residential properties, as well as ground and net leasing and green building and efforts towards sustainable development. And so I'm happy to turn it over to Keith.
Thank you, Ashira. First, I've been practicing for almost 38 years, not 30 years. And I thought I would approach this a little bit differently than some of the other panelists because I've been practicing as long as I have. I wanted to share with everyone the fact that the practice of law has always been evolving and changing, sometimes slowly and sometimes dramatically. I graduated law school in 1981. I've been at 3 firms in my career, one of them twice. And when I started, there was no internet, there was no emails, no computers, no cell phones. The ratio of secretaries to attorneys was close to 1-to-1, which meant 1 secretary per attorney. Nowadays, it's 1-to-4, 1-to-5, and in some cases, 1-to-6. Secretaries used electric typewriters, and you had to make corrections by hand with whiteout or corrected type. We had photocopy machines, but no feeders. So you had to feed documents by hand, 1 page at a time. And sometimes those pages were a ½ inch thick because literally you cut and paste. You cut pages and you pasted them onto other pages to make them, so you didn't, because there was no way of retyping pages entirely at a time. It would just take too long. There was a fair amount of downtime because of documents were sent either by hand if locally, or FedEx if they were going out of town. So once a document left your office, you could take a breather or you could move on to something else. things have been changing over time. More dramatically after 9/11, things happened very quickly. Security changed. You needed access to key cards to get into buildings. You needed passes to get into buildings, not only law offices and office buildings, but dormitories and museums and theaters, etc. Things have been changing over time. You know, we also have people who have been working from home occasionally, so that's not unusual. And I found, like Amy did, that the transition from working in the office to working at home was relatively seamless. Most of us have computers at home and laptops and printers, and if we didn't, we brought them from the office. We made sure that all of the attorneys and secretaries and administrative people had laptops, if they didn't already, that were connected to the office. And it worked out, it's working out relatively well. The problem really is more, not so much the working from home, but it's the business. I think because of the state of the economy and the state of not sure which way the pandemic is going and when we'll be back in the office, a lot of our clients are not very busy right now. So I think some of the lawyers in our firm are not as busy as they would otherwise be. But working from home has been relatively seamless. I'm a big believer in Zoom. I've done many Zoom meetings even before the pandemic, particularly with clients and offices and meetings out of town. It just saves a lot of time with travel, et cetera. In terms of coming back into the offices, we are slowly preparing plans for return. Wes and Amy have already outlined some of the challenges in terms of staggered returns, limited use of the restrooms, office supplies being handled very properly. And the one thing that our firm has made very clear, though, is even when the offices start opening, no one will be required to come back immediately if they feel uncomfortable or they have home care issues, child care issues, parent issues, etc. But we're looking forward to that day when things become normal again. And I think, as Wes said, that when there is, especially when there's a vaccine, things will resume and get back to a relative normal.
So much, Keith. That was very helpful, especially the perspective of, just in the past, however many years, how technology has itself transformed our experience as practicing attorneys, and, change is the only thing that's constant. Our last but not least panelist is John Napoli. John is the co-managing partner of Seyfarth Shore's New York office, and he also co-chairs the firm's national tax practice. John advises public and private clients on tax issues relating to corporate mergers and acquisitions, international transactions, restructurings, consolidations, financing, and real estate transactions. And he is highly skilled in shaping tax-efficient real estate transactions, including the formation, operation, and liquidation of REITs and UPREITs. And so it's, again, my pleasure to turn it over to John to get his perspective on the current environment.
Thank you, Shira, and thanks for having me on the panel, not being a Hofstra graduate, but growing up on Long Island. I have many friends that went there. This is my fourth firm. I started as a tax lawyer and still am a practicing tax lawyer at a boutique. Then I worked at another firm where Keith and I actually worked together, and I wound up at Seyfarth Shore ultimately in 2002. So that's a bit of my background. I've managed the office since 2005, and we've grown from 25 to about 125 lawyers, and we have about 250 people in the office, professionals and staff. So we're wrestling with all these issues that everybody's been talking about, bringing people back to work, working remotely, We have some of the same experiences as Amy and Keith. I think that one of the things that we're grappling with is, making folks come comfortable, how they feel comfortable coming back into the office. And so we are certainly taking into consideration a staged reopening. I think that we'll probably start with about 20 to 25%. We will look to first bring those people back that really can't work efficiently from home. That might be billers, some of the mailroom functions, as well as some attorneys that just aren't productive at home and have already expressed desires to get back into the office. We're going to obviously consider folks that do not feel comfortable coming back, either because of a medical condition or because they're in a high risk group, and we will, allow them certainly to continue working remotely for the foreseeable future. One of the things that we're struggling with a little bit is, and this is relevant, I think, to the students, is keeping people engaged, keeping the young associates engaged, keeping new people engaged and productive. It's one thing when you have a long-term relationship with an associate that you've worked with for many years, and now you're remote. And we had we put people remote, we gave them all the equipment to work remote, and people have obviously worked from home occasionally in the past. And we have even some what we call staff lawyers, which I don't count in our head count, that are permanently remote, that perform certain functions. So we've had a decent amount of experience with it. But when you have relatively new hires and they don't have any kind of track record with people, getting them involved in matters, getting them into a productive mode is difficult. We're even with Zoom and even with all the technologies, you don't have any baseline. So one of the things we're also looking at is trend lines to see actually whether people are as efficient. I mean, colloquially, it feels like we're not, or anecdotally kind of. It seems that, hours have trended a little bit down, and that could be because of the workflow. Certainly has slowed down. Litigation has been hit harder than some of the other areas, but corporate M&A work has been down a little bit as well. So those two, courts are just reopening, I think, for new lawsuits today or this week, and foreclosures have been on hold. So there's a lot of pent up demand. Well, hopefully it's going to bounce back as the matters start opening up. But that's certainly a concern. We're going to be tracking this sort of 2.5, 3 months to see how that's going to play out in the future. There was a survey recently done. I don't know if you folks have seen it by Major Lindsay in Africa, an associate survey, and one of the concerns by most of by a majority of the associates was job security, cost cutting measures, and et cetera. And so that's the kind of thing where we'll be looking at trends to see, are the billable hours going down? Is the interaction going down? We plan on coming back in a way where people stagger. We think coming in maybe 2 or 3 days a week in the beginning, if folks can, will be better than, so you work at home, remotely. This will help the integration, help the face-to-face, help the learning, keep people engaged, and serve to get, especially integrate new folks that we don't have as much experience with. In terms of what we did for future prospects, which I know everybody's concerned about, our third year students that had offers were on a firm-wide basis deferred until January 2021 from September, mostly because of the bar exams being taken and everything kind of being pushed forward. Our second year students that had summer internships that they were canceled, the summer clerkships, but everybody got a stipend and an offer to start next September. And for the first year students that are going to be looking for summer work next year, currently our plans are to, again, to have another summer program. I think that's the trend of most of the AmLaw 100 firms. So that's a lot, but there's still a lot of stuff going on, and this is a whole work in progress. We're all learning sort of and in this together.
I mean, thank you so much for that, because I think you're touching on probably the most important kind of concern that our students are facing, and even some of our recent graduates who are those, first and second year associates that don't have the history built up and the relationships already in place, and are worrying, about how they're going to make their mark and how they're going to be able to fit in and create those networking opportunities in this, in this remote environment. And so I really want to kind of pick up on that and ask if our other panelists could turn back on their cameras and unmute. There we go. And so I really want to, ask kind of to follow up on that with Amy and with Keith in terms of, our students are worried, and our students who now the bar exam is postponed are worried. And what are your thoughts on how COVID will affect their employment prospects, their working conditions, their opportunities for mentorship? And then, if you were advising a student, if your student or your child came to you right now and said, what areas of law should I go into? Where are there going to be jobs in the future? Where might be an area to stay away from? What would your advice be? What would your suggestions be? So I will just start with Amy, and then maybe Keith, you can give us your thoughts.
Perfect. I think that in terms of prospects, and let me first say, I don't think anybody really knows what the long-term impact of this is going to be. I just think we don't know. I think what's interesting, if you look at what, let's say, the AmLaw 100 has done with respect to compensation or furloughs or layoffs, I think it's really different than it was during the last recession of 2008 and 2009. And I think people are treating it differently because whereas in 2008, 2009, there were particular areas of the economy that were hit really hard, banking, structured finance, and I think people thought that was going to take a really long time to recover. So what firms generally did back then was to, have layoffs or reductions in force in those areas. Here, I think, there are some firms who've done nothing. A lot of firms have done a lot of different things. But generally speaking, I think the attitude has been everybody should sort of share in this, what we're hoping is some kind of temporary situation. So many firms have, had, partners reduce draws, have had compensation reductions across the board. That is what my firm did. And I think many firms did do similar things. Everyone has a little bit of a different thought process. But, I think the good thing is compared to 2008 and 2009 is where people definitely cut their summer programs and they cut their first year and second year classes. And I think most people who were working then and now are in management today feel like that was a mistake. Because then when the business came back, there were no mid-year associates. And if you were lucky enough to have not been laid off during that period and became a mid-level associate, I think those folks are in really good shape because there was such a dearth. And so I think for the younger students, and for the younger lawyers who might be on the call, I think they will be in a good position because I think people realize that we need the younger lawyers and we need them to learn. And, so I think that's a good thing. In terms of what areas I think are good or bad, I guess I would just say, I think people should practice the area in which they are interested. I do not say, you know, I think, you know, back in, even when I graduated in 1992, which wasn't a great economy, I think everyone said, oh, let's be a bankruptcy lawyer. And if you're interested in bankruptcy, that's great. But I don't personally think that you should go into an area of law if you do not have an interest in. You know, you're in it for a career and a long haul, and you should pick or be interested in and keep striving for your dreams. That's my belief. And I would also say, if you would have asked me when I was a young lawyer that I would be, you know, a partner in a big firm and a securities lawyer, I would have never thought that. So, I mean, I didn't grow up thinking I was going to do that. A lot of it is opportunistic and what you end up liking and where you end up working. And some of it is by chance, and some of it is luck, and some of it is just happenstance. So I think, so with all that, I do think areas that are, you know, particularly interesting and that are areas for the future, I think are cybersecurity and privacy issues are very, very hot topics and cross almost all industry sectors. I think employment law and issues relating to COVID are very, very interesting and complicated. I think, you know, definitely insolvency and restructuring in the short term, you know, I think is where we're busy. I think in our firm right now, we have a big aviation practice, both on the litigation front and in the structured finance front. We're super busy because the airline industry, as well as the hospitality industry, are hit so hard, and there are very complicated employment issues that people are grappling with. And I think, you know, we have a large private wealth services group, and that has been very interesting. And those people are very, very busy. And on the transactional side, you know, there definitely will be consolidations. There always are when, you know, things get disrupted, like this is definitely disrupting different companies in different situations, but that also creates opportunity. And so I am sure that, you know, and what we see on the transactional side is there are the strategic and sponsor clients and public company clients that are in a good spot and are taking advantage of opportunities. So I do think there will continue to be transactions.
Yeah, well, that's a positive outlook, and that's very helpful, I think, for comforting for our students and our alums. Keith, do you want to add anything or have your perspective?
Yes, first I agree with Amy that one shouldn't choose an area of law because of what's hot at the moment. It's interesting because when we lived through the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, as Ashira mentioned in my intro, that I do commercial leasing, both the tenant side and the landlord side. And we have a very big and high energy real estate operations group that does a lot of landlord tenant work. And of course, as today, a lot of tenants were in default, and couldn't pay their rent because of the recession. And you would think that the litigation people would be extremely busy. In fact, it was just the opposite. They weren't busy at all. The reason was was because landlords didn't want to terminate leases because they had no one to replace the tenants with. So there was a lot of negotiation. The transactional lawyers were pretty busy, but the litigators weren't busy. So I wouldn't pick an area, again, because it's a hot area. I pick an area because you're interested in it and it's something you think you could want to spend your career doing. The other thing I wanted to note is that, you know, we've come through many downturns. As I said, I started in 1981. And I remember when I graduated law school in 1981, there was a picture, the cover of Newsweek magazine, of an MBA graduate pumping gas because MBAs couldn't get jobs. 5, 6 years later, it was the height of the investment bank, and they were making oodles and oodles of money. And all the lawyers were jealous of the investment bankers who were working so hard, but making tons and tons of money. And then there was the 1987 stock market crash, and then there was the 1991 recession, and things always bounce back. So I think there's, you know, you can't time when you're coming out of law school. You know, that was up to your parents when you were born. So you're graduating when you're graduating, and you're going into an economy that's there, you know, better or worse, and it'll get better and it'll get worse again because things go around in cycles. One of the things I did want to mention is that, and I think Amy and I, we discussed this when we had a pre-meeting discussion about what we were going to talk about. One of the big mistakes that law firms made in the last recession, the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, was they stopped hiring out of law school. They suspended it, or they limited their hiring. And what happened was there was a very few mid-level associates, and mid-level associates are really what drive law firms. They're the workers. They know enough to really be productive and to assist the partners and shareholders. And I think a lot of the law firms now are not going to make that same mistake. They'll do other belt tightening measures. They'll maybe have some reductions in salary, maybe some furloughs, but they're not going to stop hiring, because that's a long-term mistake for law firms. So I think, coming out of law school now, or coming out of law school a year from now, it'll get better than it is now, and then we'll have another downturn in 6 or 7 or 10 or 12 years again for some other reason, whether it's a pandemic or a recession or a stock market crash or something like that, and then it'll bounce back again. So I think, in the long term, everyone should have a positive outlook on the future of the law business and law firms, and you shouldn't worry about that in the long term.
Thank you. Again, I think that's, extremely encouraging. I think all of you have been, sort of extremely encouraging, and, that the future is bright. The future is bright, and our students have long and happy careers ahead of them. And so I think that's great. I wanted to turn a minute to talk about the future of actual office buildings. So, attorneys, or in general, that historically have always kind of gathered in groups, and their firms have lots of people in them. And I'm just, this is really mostly, or at least firstly, geared toward Wes, in saying, what do you think is going to be the impact on law firms' decisions about how much space they want to rent? Do you think that they might want to, kind of de-densify and move some offices out into the suburbs to avoid people having to commute, and maybe take less space to kind of save some costs? Or do you think, there will still be a commitment towards the large office space? What's your kind of sense of the market?
Well, my sense is, I think Amy said it before, everybody's still trying to figure it out, and what the, and I hate this expression, but what the new normal is going to be. You mentioned densification. This is like a buzzword that we just learned in the real estate industry about a little over 10 years ago. And what it essentially means is a lot of firms, mainly tech firms, went from offices to desk seating, where they could theoretically promote collaboration, but the real benefit was maximizing space utilization and really fitting as many people as they could into a smaller footprint so they could save costs. Most law firms, and I don't want to say all law firms because there are exceptions, are still working on the traditional model of private offices. So they don't really have the large bullpen spaces that need to be opened up. And obviously some people work in the bullpen, but it's not like a tech firm. So, where possible, the firms are going to look to lower costs, and they're going to look to shed unused space. A lot of our clients are kind of looking into it now and quietly exploring the possibility of shedding space in terms of, and that's obviously going to develop as we figure out what the long range implications are here. Regarding suburban locations, I've heard from several firms and several of our clients that they're starting to consider, if they don't have one already, opening up a suburban location so they can avoid the obvious problems of commuting and getting on the subway and all the problems associated with, big city concentrations. And where I know, like Keith's firm has a White Plains office that he works out of because it's near where he lives. I mean, a lot of firms that have these existing suburban offices are giving their attorneys the ability to transfer there at least, part-time, or work there part-time. And that's clearly an advantage. I mean, what I think is going to happen, I think when firms start evaluating this, what we're going to see is firms with short-term lease commitments or short terms left on their leases, with leases expiring, they're going to look to kick the can down the road while they figure out what's going on. And firms are going to look to do an extension, 6 months, a year, so we can figure out what the real implications are and where the landlords stand with the whole thing. I mean, everybody's got to realize landlords have been hit extremely hard. and there's tremendous uncertainty in this market, and the landlords haven't even figured out where it's going or how much damage has been done or where they're going to come out. So they're worried about paying their own mortgage and worried about their own stability. So, I mean, for a law firm where I see significant opportunity and where I think a lot of the work that my team and I are going to do at Cushman with law firms and others are going to be restructuring obligations, especially for larger firms and firms with, you know, better credit history, because a creditworthy larger firm is gold for a landlord in an unstable market, where you can give them some stability in the asset and the income, and lower your costs now. So I think that there's, you know, where there's instability, there creates opportunity, and I think a lot of the firms are going to start looking into, you know, capitalizing on that opportunity as soon as the dust starts to settle and we figure out where we are.
Yeah, thank you. And I just pick up on that. I'm sorry, were one of you, was
Yeah,
John,
I mean,
were you going to say something?
I was going to say that you know, we happen to fall into that category. We have 130,000 square feet in the New York Times building, and our lease expires in 2023, which isn't that far off. And notices, you know, you start looking a couple of years ahead. So we're actually in that process that Les was talking about, but C&W is going to be representing us. But that's going to be a negotiation with the existing landlord. You know, that's a lot of space in that building, and you know, there's going to be permanent changes on configuration probably, but the you know, I think that at least our thinking right now, and we don't really know yet, but you know, making decisions in the middle of a crisis isn't, you know, long term isn't a good thing. So we're going to probably wait and see things as they sort out. But at least our current thinking is to keep single offices. That also helps with this separation, albeit they may be smaller. Every time we try to go to you know, multiple offices, you know, multiple people in an office, you get pushback anyway from a lot of the associates and the younger folks. And the configurations with this staffing is going to change probably with different partitions or higher partitions, and instead of lower partitions.
Yeah, so that's kind of how you might reconfigure, you know, 130,000 feet of office space in the city. I wanted to also just pick up on Keith to say, you know, Wes mentioned that you have a White Plains office, and so what are your thoughts on how to utilize that, or even to create more of them?
Well, it's interesting because we, first of all, in terms of this, I do a lot of our leasing for our own. We have about 32 offices in the United States and a few overseas. And I do a lot of our firm leasing, and we've already started downsizing the office sizes, because even before the pandemic, the thought was, because real estate costs are the second largest expense of a law firm, the first being salaries, we already were looking at that, and the size of offices has dramatically decreased over time. And people working from home, as I said before, has started way before the pandemic, whether it's because of childcare issues or other issues. And it's interesting. I work a lot out of the White Plains office, and I told some of my colleagues who live in Westchester or Connecticut, who otherwise work in our Manhattan office, and why don't you come to the White Plains office, because you don't have to commute, you drive, we have a garage in the building, et cetera. They said, well, if I can't go to my regular office, I might as well work at home. There was no advantage to coming to a satellite office if your main office is somewhere else. I think the biggest issue is going to be, and I think John alluded to this before, is that no matter where you're working from, I think the younger attorneys, particularly the ones coming out of law school, need to be in an office. They need to be mentored directly, personally. You just can't substitute the physical proximity and training that you get working side by side at a desk, at a conference room, et cetera. Body language, the ability to ask questions quickly and get responses quickly. There's just no substitute for that. So I think what's going to happen is conference rooms may shrink because there are going to be fewer in-person meetings, and you'll do more by Zoom. And a lot of law firms, we're moving our offices actually next year, next door to the new building on Vanderbilt, and I think we were going to have a whole floor of conference rooms, and we're not going to do that anymore. But there's still no substitute for offices and in-person mentoring and the collegiality and the collaboration. You just need that.
Yeah, I agree. So we've gotten some great questions from the participants, so I'm going to try to get to some of them. One of them was, how are you suggesting that we, I guess, law firms deal with potential lawsuits from employees who get sick after returning to work? You know, there's obviously some considerations about, you know, liability protection, but assuming that nothing is done on that end, what are your thoughts about how to, you know, prepare for that? And anyone who wants to kind of take a stab at it.
Ask a lawyer.
Get me out of that.
Is this someone who's trying to get a job?
No, I don't know.
I mean, go ahead, John.
No, you go.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that I have heard, and my firm, you know, hasn't done this, or if they're going to do it, they haven't just, but I have heard that some firms, particularly those that are having their workforce come into work voluntarily. So in other words, those people who so want to opt in because they're comfortable. I have seen some firms thinking about getting waivers from their employees. I don't know if they're enforceable. I don't know if that's best practices. It's an interesting thought. I think in terms of, I know, you know, before we went to work remotely, you know, we definitely had issues in our office, you know, for people, and a protocol with respect to what happens if you have symptoms, or what happens if you have been exposed to someone who you thought had COVID. And, you know, we had strict protocols to protect, you know, those people. And, you know, we made them self-quarantine if they had traveled, you know, to countries that at the time had a lot of COVID. And so, you know, we dealt with sort of self-certifications and things like that, similar to visitors who were coming, either clients or other visitors. We also had them self-certify with respect to things like that. And, you know, one of the things that's going to be an interesting issue, and I think different buildings and different law firms and different companies are taking different approaches, is, are you going to have people tested before they come into the office? Are you going to take temperatures? Are you going to self-certify that everyone's taken their temperature when they come into the office? And, you know, there are a lot of legal issues relating to the pros and cons of that. And I don't think any of that has been determined yet.
Yeah,
Well,
we did that, you know, during flu season. We do that. You know, human resources is very clear. If any symptoms of the flu, stay home, because, you know, we debate the seriousness of the flu versus COVID, but in terms of infecting other people, we were very strict. If you were not feeling well, stay home.
Yeah, and I know that some buildings, and I think are going to actually are thinking about having overhead scanners so that they'll test for temperatures. And if you have a temperature, someone will be taken aside to theoretically see what office they're visiting, then check to see with that tenant, do they want them or not want them, because, you know, the owner is only taking so much responsibility. We're asking folks to come in and to basically certify that they don't, to take their temperatures at home, and if they have a temperature, not to come into the office. Also, if someone is uncomfortable because they consider themselves at risk or have an elderly parent or something like that, or that they're taking care of, we'll make accommodations at least for the foreseeable future. Yeah. So I don't see any liability if somebody happens to come in. If we take all these reasonable steps, you know, have the space people out, give them the instruments, we'll provide masks. If they don't have them, they're going to be required to walk around in common areas with masks. In their office, they can say themselves, and they come in and they get sick. You know, I'm not a litigator, but I think that's when you're making as many, you're acting as reasonably as we possibly can, given all the circumstances. It's kind of hard to say that we're liable for that, and I don't. But we'll see. I don't. Hopefully, the law has not evolved to a strict liability standard.
Yeah, and actually, but you mentioned walking around in common areas in masks, and that, I think, in and of itself is going to have an impact on, you know, networking and how people get to know each other and mentoring, because there's like a physical barrier and you can't see people's faces, you know, and it's harder to read expressions and to get that comfort. And I actually want to ask a question, which I know is not in any of your, specific areas of expertise, but maybe you have thoughts on it, which was a question that we got from one of our alums, one of our more recent alums who graduated in 2008 and kind of just hit the ground in the middle of that recession. And he pointed out, and I know this is true for a lot of our students, not everybody goes to big law firms. Not everybody ends up in big corporate law firms. And so what about other types of practices where maybe face-to-face interaction is really important, like in family law or criminal defense? What do you think about, if you have any thoughts on it? Again, I know that that's not where you practice, but what are some of the challenges that those attorneys are going to face, and how might those areas of law have to respond?
Actually, if I could, I was visiting a friend actually of mine who has a house out in Quogue, and he's a trust and estates lawyer. I visited him over the weekend, and we stayed 6 feet apart, of course. And he said it was easy. It's a 3 or 4 person firm. He does trust and estates. He has a corporate lawyer in the firm. He has a real estate lawyer on the firm. They have a couple of associates. Everybody's working remotely, and I think it more depends upon the practice and whether they're busy or not than working remotely or with the size of the firm. Because I have another friend who's a real estate litigator in a very small firm, and he's basically out of business because, as I mentioned before, there's no courts are closed first of all, and there's not a lot of litigation right now. So I don't think it's so much the size of the firm. Obviously, the size of the firm will help in terms of support, and they could probably absorb more losses and have maybe a bigger cushion than some of the smaller firms. But I don't think the size of the firm matters, and I think working may be even easier to work remotely when you're in a small firm because you have fewer people to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. So we're almost out of time, but if one of you wants to kind of make a comment on this and a final thought. No.
The only thing I'm going to add is that so much learning goes on through mentoring, and what Amy said and Keith said about where you practice and what area you practice and how you practice. Ultimately, we are meant to be together and interact, and there's a lot of nonverbal communication that goes on. So whether you're in a big law firm or a small law firm, wherever you're going, what you'll do, what you'll turn into, and what area you'll practice may depend in large part upon not only your desires, but the people you come in contact with. When you have a good relationship and you have a good positive learning experience and you get a good mentor to help you, because law school is just step one in the process.
I think that is the absolute perfect advice to end our panel, because I do think that's right. Amy mentioned it too. When you're a first-year law student or even a third-year law student, you might not be able to imagine that one day you'll be a partner at a big firm or a successful trust and estates lawyer or whatever it is. But those opportunities are available, and a lot of it is being in the right place at the right time and making the connections, putting yourself out there to try to make connections. And so social interaction is important for everyone. So I want to thank our panelists again so much for being here with us. We were not able to get to some of the really good questions that were online, but they're there, they're in the chat, and I'm sure we can continue to think about them. Any kind of final thoughts?
By the way, if anybody wants to email any of us, I'm speaking for everybody else, but certainly for myself, if you have our information, just look us up online. If you have any questions, feel free to email us or call us, and I'm certainly happy to respond individually if anybody has any follow-up.
That's a very generous. Thank you. Oh, excellent. That's a very, very generous offer. All right. Well, on that
also,
note,
I just wanted to say one thing. Somebody emailed that they couldn't find this how-to guide, which I wasn't able to look up where it was on the website. If anybody wants to email me, I can send you a copy if you're really interested in taking a look at the Cushman & Wakefield how-to guide for return to the office.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to shut the meeting down, and I hope that many of our participants will join us again at our next webinar, and hope everyone has a good day.